Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this afternoon's edition of The Big Shrink with myself, Ash King, and the founder and head psychologist of the Indigo Project, the beautiful Mary Hoang. Hi,
How
Mary.
you going? Nice
I'm
to see you, Ash.
nice to see you too. Thanks for joining me again, as always, on these very pleasant chats we've had on these Monday afternoons. How's your week been going? Tell me about it.
Not been pretty good actually. I think it's nice to have a bit of a break. I've been finding that I probably let a little bit of my day slide into working quite a bit, and there's not as much of the structures where you kind of go to work and you have your normal routines. So I've had, a day off over the weekend, and it's just made a massive difference in terms of how I'm feeling and how I'm thinking. So I'm kind of stringing sentences together a little bit more concisely. Like I think last week I was just burning the candle at both ends. Well, actually for the last couple of weeks, actually. So it's amazing what the difference, a day does to stress and worry and your ability to make decisions and think a little bit more clearly. So yeah, always a little bit of undertone of anxiety, but that's just that's just something that I always kind of battle with.
That
And how are
that
you?
Oh, yeah, I'm okay. This week I think I've been a little bit restless. I I like structure, but I also hate it. And so sometimes when I think that my weeks start to get too similar, I sort of crave doing something out of the ordinary just to sort of, I don't know,
Break it up.
yeah, break it up, like bring a little spark into back into life. And I always, like to do things like go for a horse ride or like go on a roller coaster. And you can't go on roller coasters. All the theme parks are closed. And Sydney's a pretty crappy city to go on a roller coaster anyway. We barely have any. But actually, I went for a bushwalk, which is a new thing for me.
Nice.
And we went for a walk to the figure eight pools in the Royal National Park.
Oh,
So
amazing.
yeah, we couldn't actually get out there though because the well was so high. It pretty much just obliterated the whole area where the pools were. So
Yeah, I
anyway,
heard it's pretty precarious. Like you've got to get there at the right time.
yeah, you need to check the swell and the tides. And we checked the tides and the tides were good. And then we showed up and I was like, oh, the ocean looks quite angry today. And my husband's like, yeah, we're not going down there.
Good call. Good call.
Yeah, I would have probably just, soldiered on. I have no idea. But I'm probably like one of those Instagram influencers who just goes down there for the picky off and is like, oh God, this is very dangerous.
Nice one.
So maybe we can get stuck into our topic because it's a pretty huge one today. And I'd like to say a special thank you to those of us, to those of you who've been watching these and actually getting in touch with even just myself or with Mary and letting us know that you've been connecting with them, and some topics that you've maybe had on your mind that you'd like us to explore. And so that's how we came to choosing today's topic, which is exploring what has come up in the space of isolation. So, for so many of us, this has been a very singular experience, a very unique experience. And I don't think any of us have actually lived through it in exactly the same way. And where some people may have found, a lot of growth and space to reconnect with themselves and their relationships. Other people may have had to deal with some really challenging emotions, some really challenging thoughts, and some really challenging, like experiences with work, with relationships and everything. So that's kind of what we wanted to get into. So maybe we can kick off with, what good things this space of isolation may have provided some of us, and maybe for
Totally.
you, what you found in the space.
Yeah. Well, I think it's been a bit of a double-edged sword for people because having that forced kind of pause has given people time to reflect upon their needs, their energy levels, their routines, how they work, how they love, how they live and play, and how much, we are all attached to our routines. not only our routines, but our identities, what we do for work, and how we are in the world. So I think there's been a good part of it which has allowed this reflection, but probably what has been challenging for people is to recognize that there has been quite a bit of an attachment to either, you know, like a type of working or being accomplished in some way by, you know, being out there and showing who you are. But I think also a lot of people are finding that they're having, you know, they're forced to connect more and have more meaningful connections with others. People are getting into a lot more exercise. I know that my clients who are, you know, obviously telling me about the struggles and the good parts of this period are saying that they've been able to form new routines and new ways of working. So obviously being outside and being in nature has been something that's been a lot more conscious for people. And just learning how to actually be with not having to do so much. Again, that's a little bit of a double-edged sword. Like I think when people can relax into it, they're finding that, wow, did I need to be doing so much all the time? And you know, people are finding ways to feel good and value themselves with smaller things, like smaller things that they're doing for themselves, self-care, learning new hobbies, learning new interests. So yeah, it definitely has been a mixed time for everyone. I would say both good and bad, but when we understand what is good and what is bad, I think it's, you know, everything is an opportunity for us to go a little bit deeper and learn about ourselves and what is really important and meaningful to us.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. And I think even you sort of brought it up there with the connections with people. I guess like enforced isolation has given people the space, I guess, to pull back from certain social obligations. And from people that I've spoken to, and even a couple of our therapists, you know, who have come on the Get Psyched episodes with me recently, have just said how much they have actually enjoyed, you know, having that space to be their sort of introverted self. And I think a lot of us, we tend to think that, oh, you're either an introvert or an extrovert, whereas there's that huge middle ground where, I mean, in research we call it the ambiverts. You're like, you know, a bit of each, and it depends on the context. But you know, people not really feeling that pressure to have to say yes to everything, not to go out to every social engagement, not worried about hurting people's feelings, you know, if they say no to something. And even other people who are just like, you know, you might ask them to grab a coffee and they'll just be like, actually, I'm not quite ready. Like, I'm not quite ready to go out and do the restaurant thing yet, or the pub thing yet, or the coffee thing yet. And you're just like, fair.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a huge part that, you know, maybe some of our actions prior to the crisis were motivated by guilt,
Mm-hmm.
or motivated in the desire to portray a positive image that is very, you know, accommodating to other people. So when you force everyone to somewhat stay at home and there's no need for people to necessarily have to go out of their way to people please,
Mm-hmm.
I think people are finding that they can breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief, not having to necessarily make up excuses and feel bad about not being there and having FOMO and all of that. But
Yeah.
also just like, yeah, learning how to listen to oneself and going, well, actually, maybe I actually packed my schedule way too much before this, and I didn't even have time to breathe, spend time with myself, reflect and care for myself.
Yeah, yeah. And you've often mentioned, you know, the idea of energy and our energy exchanges with certain people in certain relationships. And sometimes it is, they can still be really enriching relationships, but sometimes it just takes a lot out of you to sort of be social and to be with other people and to sort of hear them out and to open yourself to them. And sometimes, yeah, we just need to like understand that our friendships or our good relationships aren't all going to fall apart if we don't, you know, see each other at this date, at this time, you know, every week or every month.
Well, I think the challenge is, especially in Sydney, is that, you know, people's schedules are so packed that you ask someone, when are we going to hang out next? And you get a date in 3 weeks, sometimes a month,
Yeah.
sometimes even longer. So, you know, the challenge with, you know, learning how to be with ourselves is that our emotions and our moods are fluctuating day by day, moment by moment. So, you know, we make a decision you know, thinking about a future self going,
Mm.
yeah, you know, I'll totally be up for that. And then that kind of time rolls around and you think, gosh, like I never anticipated that I'd be feeling burnt out, that I
Yeah.
wouldn't be wanting to do this, and other things have come up that we didn't anticipate. So, you know, it's hard, you know, when we make so many plans and then we feel like we are somewhat obliged to keep them at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. I'm definitely feeling like a lot of people can relate for sure on this regard. So, you know, obviously some great space for self-discovery, for a renewal of relationship and connection. But one of the things that has come up with some people that I've been chatting to is how sitting in this space of maybe not having all the work, all the distractions, you know,
Mm.
all these like social obligations to keep your mind busy and to keep you preoccupied, has been quite triggering for people who may be working through trauma, people who, you know, may not have a super comfortable relationship with themselves, and they're like, oh, like shit, here I am with myself all the time and I'm not dealing.
It's full on.
Mm.
It's kind of like being, you know, sometimes, you know, we've gone on to done meditation or decided to do a meditation retreat, and we think that we're going to be feeling super calm because we've got some space, but actually what we first usually feel is agitation and restlessness and discomfort, and we start to be able to pay a little bit more attention to what is happening within the body.
Mm.
And the body holds so much of our emotions that we typically tend to suppress or avoid. And I think when we've finally got that space, we're not just feeling, you know, all this challenge that's going on around us, but I think that we're actually sitting with some stuff that we haven't actually been able to sit with because of our busy schedules prior to all of this. So unhealed trauma, some woundings, some relationships that we haven't let go of. And this is a perfect opportunity for us to kind of go back, if we feel called to do the work, and to look at, you know, well, what are some situations in my life that I may have just tried to close over very quickly and get over. Maybe I just rushed into another relationship, got into another job, you know, got really busy, so I didn't need to deal with things. You know, and they could be even things that are quite socially acceptable behaviors that we do to avoid, you know, dealing with some of our wounds, like exercising or helping others, and, you know, being I guess accomplished, are also ways in which we can move away from things that are unhealed.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So if you were chatting to someone who maybe brings up that they're feeling, you know, maybe quite scared and quite anxious about being confronted by these types of feelings, how would you maybe guide them through it?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing is for people, you know, especially when I'm working in a therapeutic relationship with someone, is, you know, we sometimes need to feel a little bit safe to be able to explore some of those feelings. You know, but it doesn't mean to say that we can't find safety within ourselves to explore things that are unhealed or still wounding us. So I would, you know, ask people to, you know, potentially, you know, tell me about some of the situations that are still maybe at the back of their minds. I would obviously tell them that their feelings are completely normal to have, but and at the same time, pushing away those feelings isn't necessarily going to make them feel better. So that's what we think. We think if we just like sweep them under the carpet or swoosh them away somehow, that we just won't experience them. But what research shows is that we not only still experience them, but when we chronically suppress, we actually block out feeling good. So, you know, we can get into like toxic positivity by saying, well, you should be happy and you should be grateful, and like, I'll just put a silver lining on this. But, you know, when people kind of understand that feeling their emotions is actually a very safe and healthy way to help process some of the stuff from the past, we can go a little bit deeper. And maybe we can look at some structured ways of looking at how to actually unpiece some of the stuff that's happened in the past. I would probably start with looking at some of the beliefs that may have shifted because of certain situations in the past. So I'd be asking people to see if they could understand, well, what made you think, how do you think differently about yourself because of that situation? Or how do you think differently about the world or relationships because of something that might have happened to you in the past? Do you feel as though you're not as a capable person? Do you feel you're not good enough? Do you feel like people can't be trusted? Do you feel that the world is like a dangerous place to be in? What are some of these beliefs that may have shifted because of certain situations in the past that have been challenging? And then I would also ask people to look at potentially what needs weren't met at that time. So if they had a situation with a person where they had maybe an argument or a falling out or a breakup of a relationship, potentially they might have recognized that some of their needs, psychological needs for safety, for honesty, for an authentic relationship, may not have been met. And what people typically tend to do after a relationship or some trauma, sometimes people just try to push everything away. So not only are they not meeting themselves compassionately and saying, hey, it's okay for you to feel like this, and like some of these needs of yours weren't met, and how can I meet my own needs? We tend to kind of push them away, and then when our needs come up in our relationships, in this time, we say, oh no, we shouldn't, we're being too needy, or we're not allowed to feel that way. So if we go back into some of these situations, maybe firstly by writing them down and writing a little bit about them, not only can we start to bring up some of those feelings safely and maybe get into our bodies a little bit and process them and feel them, but we can also understand that that we have like different parts of us. And there's a part of us, for example, that does feel a little bit wounded or hurt from situations in the past. But what we can also do is understand that we have many parts of us. So we might have a part that's become very critical of ourselves because of certain situations in the past. We may have a part of us that's very needy, or that feels guilty and feels like they need to people please. But then we can also work in ways of how can we cultivate part of us, that part of us which is the sense of self. And the sense of self is a little bit it can be a little bit woo-woo to some people when you're asked to kind of maybe feel into your body and try to find a place in your body that you feel safe in, or some of the beliefs within yourself where because we can hold opposing beliefs, many of them at the same time. And so usually we're holding a belief like I'm not good enough, but we also have beliefs that I am capable, I am confident. So that's when we have the inner conflict that so many people are experiencing, is because there's parts of us that have not only different needs but different belief systems, and we can kind of separate them and look at them individually and go, okay, well that part of me came from a certain place, and that part of me came from this situation. But then there's this kind of really beautiful part of me too, which is all-seeing, who loves me, who's very compassionate, and has that sense of self-worth and self-value. And if we can try to find ways to speak from that space and feel from that place and to kind of be in the world from that place, we can actually strengthen our ability to not only meet the wounded parts of us, but strengthen the part of us that is actually quite grounded and that is always there, but sometimes just gets clouded over by all the other. It's like a little family within your body and your mind. It's I don't know what your family is, but it's chaotic in there.
Well, you're just making me think of so in our GIST online personal development course that we've got, Mary actually chats about this concept, to do with like a boardroom almost, and having different, I guess, voices around the room. And I was almost thinking that it's kind of like, if no one's managing the meeting, there's going to be the same bloody loudmouth getting up and talking all the time. And like, if it's you or if it's me, it's like, oh, you're like really shit at mostly everything that you try to do, and you should probably just like stop. And then you've got the other, the other more self-compassionate voice, who hasn't been given any mic time. So no wonder they're not as confident getting up and going, well, actually, like, I think that, you're pretty capable, and I think that you should go for it. Like, they're kind of that too quiet, and they have never really been given the boost to get up. So, like, who's
Absolutely.
that? who's that big, you know, I guess when you're talking about the sense of self, and when you mention it, you know, I'm kind of like, well, which self, you know, because like, which one do I choose? But having the idea that like we're not any one of those people sitting at the table, we're like the entire organization.
Absolutely. And, you know, we've got to be in families that are chaotic. We've got to learn how to accept the family members of ours that push our buttons, that, you know, have the microphone all the time and tell us what to do and put us down. But, you know, it's not about eliminating them. It is about learning how to give them a voice. And, you know, sometimes you find out that sometimes these parts of you are actually a protection.
Mm.
So sometimes, you know, there's been times in our lives when maybe we've been in situations where we've been quite vulnerable and we haven't allowed to be, you know, fully vulnerable. And so we might have just been very defensive instead. And that part of us has kind of learned to protect, you know, our vulnerabilities by being defensive or kind of putting a wall up. And I think that's when we start to grow in self-compassion, is when we can start to understand at least some of the main parts of us and main voices. So, you know, people might be watching and thinking, I have multiple personality disorder. Or, you know, it does feel like you know, I mean, we all suffer from inner conflict and that challenge of like, what do I do next? And problems making decisions. And that's because we have all these different parts of us. But if we start to understand them as different sub-personalities, and kind of have them have different characteristics and get to know them, then we can know when they're showing up a little bit more, and we can understand why they're there. So, you know, my sister, she, you know, used to annoy the shit out of me, and she used to be really controlling and always had to like, you know, just like, she's like, eat this or drink this or do this. And, you know, and I, you know, after a while, I started to realize that she had her own insecurities.
Yeah,
You know,
that sounds like me. I was that sister. That was me. Shocking to admit.
and so I started to have more compassion for her, realizing that that's not how she is and that's how she wants to be. It's what helps her to feel safe. And that's why she does what she does.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when we look at, sometimes, you know, we're in relationships with our friends and with our partners, and we, you know, nobody's perfect, but we're able to be a little bit more compassionate and sometimes just look beyond certain behaviors and think, it's just the thing that's like playing out at the moment, but I'm not going to take it personally. And we have to sort of do that for ourselves, our ability to sort of see our critical side or our wounded sides or our vulnerabilities and say, you know, it's okay. All these parts have emerged for some reason. And if we can shift our frame of thought around why they have emerged, we can actually become more integrated and attuned with ourselves. And so, you know, this, what we're sort of trying to move towards is a feeling of being more connected with ourselves. So when we try to disown parts of us that have formed because of trauma, because of difficult parts, and say, oh, I've just got to get rid of that. Like, when is that part going to go away? I've done all this meditation and I can't seem to get rid of it. It's a little bit of the wrong attitude to have towards, like, you know, working on the self, because it really is more about bringing the family of different parts of us together. And I think the more that we do that, it doesn't mean that we make them real and we make them like that's our identity. In fact, we can actually detach a little bit from, this part of me is my whole self and how I'm going to be forever. That's how I am. I'm never going to change. And we can be a little bit more flexible in our thinking, and also learn how to bring ourselves back to that sense of that more wise self that says, it's going to be okay. You know, it's just, everything will be fine. Just take a little time and have a little break, and it will be okay.
Yeah, give the wise self some more mic time. You know, they're usually just sitting back going, I can see what's happening here, and I'm just not going to say anything until they come to me. One thing that I did want to ask you while we were talking about this is that I also think that it can be quite confronting, and almost you can get quite defensive with yourself when you are looking back into thinking about how some of these parts of the self have emerged. And like you said, you know, a lot of them do emerge in childhood, in our formative relationships. And I think that, you know, we grow up, we are rational, we are sensible for the most part. We consider ourselves intelligent. We consider ourselves autonomous, like we make our own choices. And the idea that we have to then admit to ourselves that something that happened that we were like, oh yeah, like it was just like this little thing like that happened when I was in primary school, you know, and then have to admit that there is a now an entire part of ourselves that was formed by then makes us, I don't know, like for me, it makes me feel a bit frustrated and also a bit, yeah, defensive.
Absolutely. I mean, that's probably like another part that's coming up, which is like, no, it's not happening, or no, I'm fine now, like, you know, I'm over it. And that's complete. I think those are completely normal feelings to have, because we do have a tendency to want to just feel good, as if feeling good all the time is the, you know, the be all and end all and the standard of, like, you know, happiness.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, when we go, it's very normal when, for example, when I'm taking clients through some of this journey, that those parts that are they're protections. The defensive side is like, no, 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 everything's fine, it's good. But that's protecting the vulnerable part
Mm.
of you, which potentially may, you know, feel quite sad because of what has happened. So recognizing that that's just another part is just another thing. It's like, okay, well, what does that defensive part have to say if we were to have a conversation with it? And we come closer to that relationship. Well, where did this defensiveness come from? You know, when do you know, tell me about times in your life where you've been defensive, or how did that work for you? And what we'd find is like all these different parts, they've all got this, they've all had a positive somewhat effect in our lives. So they're not just there to cause us trouble. They're there to, you know, they've all served a purpose in some way. So, you know, I think it's completely normal to have those feelings and to feel apprehensive about bringing stuff up, because I guess, you know, like I said to you in the last session, I think we've put distress and growth on different sides of the continuum. So I can't, like, if I'm growing, I have to feel good. You know, if I'm in distress, I'm in pain, and, you know, I'm in tragedy. And in fact, we need to shift that way of thinking, I guess that belief that I can't grow while feeling pain.
Mm.
And that's what starts to flip things for people, is that, okay, well, why don't we just, well, what about if you say, okay, let's just continue the way that you are? What happens if you do nothing and just continue the way you, and most people would say, well, you know, I'd say, how would you feel tomorrow? How would you feel in a year's time? What would your life be like in 5 years' time? And a lot of people say, well, if I keep continuing this way, holding this belief about myself, or letting this part of me play out, my relationships aren't going to be good. I'm not going to be putting myself out there for opportunities. Like, I'm going to be feeling more anxious or more depressed or more stressed. And then so we start to understand that there are also consequences for not kind of going back and looking at things at the root level. So, you know, I guess we all have a choice. We can be in the bubble of like, but, you know, everything's kind of fine right now, which is all good. Like, I'm all for, like, if it feels good, you know, sometimes we just got to like ride it for, you know, for as long as we can, the good feelings. But sometimes we find that can be a little bit of an illusion as well. And that what's underneath, that's what's being brought up to the surface for so many people during this kind of COVID crisis, is that veneer or that mask of everything is fine is actually, things aren't all fine. And it doesn't mean that your whole world is falling apart necessarily. It just means that there are some parts, you know, of your life that may have just been, you know, swept under the carpet. And that safe relationship, for example, between myself and a client, is to hold that person in a safe space, knowing that it's going to be okay. You know, we're kind of doing this together. Because, you know, I have a fear as well, going back into the past, that I'm going to fall into some deep black hole and never be able to kind of climb out again. Or when I'm on the verge of being vulnerable, I'm like, I want to like bawl, but then there's a part of me that holds everything back because I'm afraid to go there. And
Yeah.
I think that's completely normal. But when we start to open up, whether it's to a therapist or a good friend, we can start to realize that there are benefits of like feeling a little bit of that pain from the past, and actually being nourished by sharing that experience with other people and letting other people hold space for you.
Mm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that that brings us to the end of our session today.
Such a juicy topic.
Such a juicy topic. And I think for anyone in particular who might want to maybe even do a little bit of self-work based on kind of what we were chatting about today, maybe we could leave them with the challenge of, say, when you're journaling, see if you might be able to, you know, articulate some of those, you know, inner family members or inner boardroom a little bit clearly, like down on paper. And that way you get them out of just having a voice in your head down onto a piece of paper. And that helps to kind of separate you from them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think people can start with like 3 characters, like the inner critic, the person who's always just like, you got to do this, you got to be more, and like kind of berates you and all of that. And then we can work with the inner child, the part of you that kind of feels wounded or holds, you know, kind of vulnerable experiences from your past. And then you can work with the wise one. It's like, what are the beliefs that these 3 parts of you hold? What are their needs? And how can you communicate with them? How can you get into a little bit of a kind of closer relationship with them, so you start to understand their personalities, when they show up, when they start to kick up, and how you can, you know, meet some of their needs and develop a bit of a stronger relationship with them that is not so pushing them away.
Absolutely. A good one. There's homework today, guys. Some fun self-work for you all. Well, thank you so much, Mary. As always, it's just been such a pleasure getting to chat to you and hearing your beautiful thoughts on things, and I guess just like helping people feel like they're not dealing with their own crazy shit on their own in their heads. You know, we've all got it happening. And thank you to everyone who's tuned in to watch today. Of course, you can always go back and watch it again on our IGTV tab, and we pop it up on our Facebook page too. Get in touch with the Indigo page on Instagram, or with Mary or me if you've got any ideas for some topics, because we love a chat, don't we, Mary?
100%.
All right, thanks so much, love. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.